everybody, I'm Jenna and this is Ava. We're going to be talking about Ava's birth story and then our time in the NICU. So I think that we were actually pretty fortunate, I will say, because we didn't have to spend a lot of time in the NICU. I don't think that's common for PRO band babies. I think because they have a lot of feeding and breathing difficulties, their NICU stays are often a lot longer than ours. Our tough thing with Ava, hospital-wise, ended up being more for her surgery at 6 weeks versus her NICU stay. But we'll get to the surgery the next time. So I went to the doctor at 39 weeks. Hi, kid. I went to the doctor at 39 weeks and they checked my fluid levels and saw that the fluid was low. Now, because the fluid was low, they said I had to go straight to the hospital for an induction. So my understanding is one of the reasons they check the fluid so carefully for PRS babies is because the fluid level, it indicates whether or not the baby is swallowing and breathing in the womb. So if the fluid level is abnormal, that tells the doctor that something is wrong. So knowing that, I went right to the hospital. I had a baby bag packed, a hospital bag, but it was at home. So Dan had to actually go get it later. So I will say that I feel like as far as births go, mine went relatively easy. I mean, not easy, it's giving birth, but compared to some horror stories that I hear about a first-time birth, ours went pretty okay. So they started, so it must have been Monday. They started the induction on Monday, and then within about 6 to 12 hours, the contractions started. Everything was pretty basic. The only difference maybe was that I was hooked up to monitors to monitor both the contractions and the baby. I know sometimes if they are worried, that is common, but I guess they were worried for mine, so they were just keeping an eye on her. Everything seemed to progress pretty good. The trick that we use that I always pass along is to think of a poem, a song, anything that is about the length of a contraction, and then have the partner, whoever is with you in the delivery room, say that to you during a contraction to keep your mind off of it. It was a trick I got from my sister and actually helped us get through an entire evening, our entire night of labor. And Dan picked Simon and Garfunkel's Feeling Groovy because I think that's the thing he knows the lyrics the best to. So I still don't know the lyrics because I was a little distracted at the time, but apparently I heard Simon and Garfunkel over and over and over the night of my birth. So things progressed pretty well. I did have, and forgive me, I don't know the names of the pain medicine I was on. I'm sure it's written down somewhere, but I did get a little bit of pain meds to try to take the edge off. And then I was hoping it would help me get out of bed and like kind of move around because I labored a lot in bed because I was so hooked up to monitors. Unfortunately, it just kind of made me feel nauseous, so I continued laboring in bed. By the time that started to wear off and my contractions were increasing, apparently they weren't coming close enough, so that's about the time where they were going to give me Pitocin. And it was also the time where I was like, I went to my nurse and I said, "Is now a good time for an epidural?" And she said yes, and I was like crying with, "Okay, yes, please." Once I had the epidural, like it was awesome. So, but I will say I did not try to go through this with no pain meds. My only rule or thought on it was I wanted to be able to change my mind because I didn't know how my body was going to react to the pain. I didn't know how intense the pain was going to feel for me, and I think everyone feels pain differently. So I went in there just knowing I want to be able to change my mind. And I kind of actually knew that I was probably going to have an epidural because I was open to it. And I just talked with the nurse that I had, who was fantastic, to kind of keep checking in, like, because I knew I didn't want to have it too early, and obviously you don't want to get to a point where you can't have it anymore if you're going to have it. So I got that epidural and I could finally like relax, and my body actually relaxed to the point where they could take me off the Pitocin, because once my body wasn't tense anymore and I could relax because of the epidural, the contractions started coming more quickly and closer together like they wanted. I think I was actually doing okay with the emotional processing, maybe even up until the time I had to push. So they couldn't tell us how Ava was going to be once she came out. They didn't know how severe the feeding issues were going to be. They didn't know how severe the breathing issues was going to be. And so there was a lot of fear of unknown. And especially those last couple weeks, I liked that, and I felt very safe knowing that she was in my stomach and that I could feel her moving and that she was okay. I was nervous about her coming out because I didn't know if she was going to be okay or how she was going to do. Like, there was a big part of me that almost wanted to keep her in my stomach, because then I knew that she was safe and I could take care of her. I did pretty good through the labor given that fear. It wasn't until it was time to push, and where the doctor comes in, and I actually didn't end up pushing very long. It was only like maybe 4 contractions. Like I said, I feel like I lucked out with my labor. And maybe it was because she was like a 5-pound baby. I don't know how it would have been if she would have been bigger, but the doctor's there. They're like, okay, it's time to push, and just think about your baby. You're gonna get to meet your baby. And I was really overwhelmed, and I couldn't think about it. I couldn't, because every time I did that, I couldn't do deep breathing. I was getting really tense. I was getting really scared, because what if she came out? I mean, and there was problems because I knew Dan had come out and he was not breathing. He was blue. And so for all I knew, Ava was going to come out and was going to be struggling, or something bad was going to happen, and I was terrified. But obviously you're pushing, like you don't really have a choice, right? The baby's gonna come out one way or the other. And because I had been at that point in labor for 19 hours, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm hungry. I'll just focus on that banana over there, because at least once the baby's out, then I can eat. I can't think about the baby. I'll just think about the banana. So, for better or for worse, I had to focus on that just to keep the fear at bay. So I pushed, and like I said, I didn't have to push very long. That very first time I heard her cry, it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Because I was so scared. I was so scared she wasn't going to be okay. So they were able to put her on my chest. Dan was able to cut the cord. What I forgot to say is that because they knew that Ava had PRS issues, we had the neonatologist in the room, and then all of his nurses, and then my OB, all of my nurses, my husband, and then my mom was also there. So there was like 10 to 15 people in that room, because everyone was prepared for this. So they put her on my chest, cut the cord. I got a couple seconds just, I'm crying. I'm so glad she's okay. Then they take her to the little heating station in the corner of the room to make sure that she's okay, that there's no active obstruction. They did find the cleft, and so they had to take the baby up to NICU. So my husband Dan went with her. My mom stayed with me, and I was actually really happy to have her there, because then I didn't have to be by myself. And then I felt safe with Ava going upstairs to NICU because I knew my husband was there. So that was a lucky thing that we were able to do. She went up to NICU. They monitored her all night. And like I said, my expectation was my husband's experience. And he was in NICU for, I think, even a couple months as they were figuring out the feeding. So I had like mentally prepared that, like, okay, she's probably going to be up there for several nights at minimum. Because she did such a good job eating, and because the airway, as long as she was positioned okay, was looking all right, she was actually able to come back into my room after one night in NICU. Once she was up there, they had a nurse that tried Dr. Brown's specialty bottle, which I talked about in the last blog, and fed her. And she was, you know, a champ eater. She ate all of it. Like she's eating her finger right now. She did this huge burp. And in some ways, I actually thought it was very special because Dan got to become the feeding expert for Ava. So well, normally I think that is, that ends up being mom's role just because of equipment reasons. Dan got to be the one to show me the recommended position for her, which was kind of on her side with the bottle and at certain angles. The other thing about my hospital stay, because I was in pretty good shape because I didn't have, I had a, you know, relatively easy birth. I did the standard 3-day stay at the hospital. I guess I was expecting that I was gonna maybe get some rest because there was nurses and other people to help with the baby, but there were so many specialists, not only for Ava, but resources for me and Dan, doctors for me, lactation specialists for me. All of these people had to come into the room. And I know there's a little bit of that with any pregnancy because, you know, they want to check on the mom, check your stats and all of that. But I think for us, there was even more because we had to set up and meet all of what would be Ava's doctors. And like I've talked about before, she has needed several. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. So I didn't get much rest. I did take full advantage of the lactation specialist there. I had it in my head that I wanted to at least see if she could go to breast because I was convinced that if I did that, then it would help my milk come in, even if, you know, even though they did tell me that she couldn't feed from me to not completion, but for nourishment, because it would just tire her out. And so we were able to put her to breast a couple times with the specialist, but ultimately because it took so much energy for her to do a feed, to even for 10 minutes at a time, like to put her to breast was actually kind of taking calories away from her because then she'd be too tired to do her bottle. So that for us meant that I ended up being an exclusively pumping mom for several months. I will try to do another vlog on that. I am not the expert, but I will share at least what worked for me or what we did anyway. So after the one night in NICU, Ava was in our room, and I got to have my little baby around. They did have the hospital photographer come by, and so we got some cute pictures. She was just so tiny. She's just so tiny. So like I said, I think it is abnormal, our experience, that she only needed to be in NICU one night. She obviously had other hospital times, which we'll talk about later. But I did want to touch base about how the birth went, and then also her stay in NICU. Thank you everybody for listening, and I hope that there's something here that you find helpful, or at least interesting if you are following our story. We need to go check on our dog Stella. She's outside, and I think Miss Ava might need a teether. So, all right, say goodbye. Bye. Oh, bo, 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 bo. Bye, guys.